Good morning.
Good morning.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Okay, I'm still trying to learn a little bit about Zoom. I'm just going to try to see. All right, you know what? As long as you can hear me, I'm not going to play games now because it could only mess us up. All right. So let me, we have a minute or two. Am I just going to get a drink?
Good morning.
Morning. Shavua Tov. How are you?
Tired, but otherwise all right.
The heat's kind of draining.
Do what?
The heat is very draining.
Yeah, and it's gonna hit 39, I think.
Wow.
So, and it's gonna be like this for a few days, from what I understand. So, not gonna be pleasant.
Right, right.
There's no chakras minion, right? It's just Mincha Maariv.
Right. I mean, that outside here is just Mincha Maariv. There are things going on for Shachris around, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, no.
Times.
It's okay. It's just nice getting out. Just getting out in general and being able to daven with a minion.
Right. Yeah, I know the Sparty one at the end of the Tayel, it has an outdoor Shachrit minion. I'm not sure what time they start. And I'm not sure.
By the shul or at the other end?
The one at the far end?
Yeah, the Sephardi shul.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the shul or in the Tayelet?
Well, they're back.
Damon, can we get started? I'm in a little bit of a rush.
Sure.
Sorry, I apologize. Shavua Tov. So we're here on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis, and we're actually up to the Mishnah, but I realize that it's going to take us a few minutes, that we need a review of the last piece of Gemara here on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis. And this sugya has to do with what's called a kippah. So we're going to review the Gemara of Amar Abaye, which you'll see, let's say about 6 lines up before the Mishnah. And what we're trying to figure out is when you have an archway, as we discussed last week, which is called a kippah, is it large enough to be considered a Pesach as far as the Chiyuv Mezuzah is concerned? And the basic principle of this Gemara is that you need 2 things. There are 2 requirements in order to validate a Pesach for the Chiyuv Mezuzah. One thing is that you need a Gova Asara. I'll get back to that in a minute. And number 2, what you need is a Rochav of Dalit Tfachim. However, that Rochav of Dalit Tfachim has to be at a minimum height. And what it means is that you have to have what's called a Tchilas Pesach. The Tchilas Pesach, and then we'll get to the Gova, which is the clincher. But first we go on the bottom. The bottom part of the Pesach has to have a certain minimum width. And that minimum width has to be at a certain height. And that certain height is Gimel Tfachim. So you're 3 Tfachim up from the ground and 4 Tfachim wide. The second condition is that from the ground to the top of the kippah is a minimum of 10 Tfachim. Again, we're talking about a very small opening, right? Because, 10 Tfachim, I don't know if it's, I don't even know if it reaches my waist, but it's quite small. But nevertheless, it's called a Pesach as far as Chiyuv Mezuzah. So we're going to have a statement of Abaye. Abaye is going to say that if you're missing one of these 2 conditions, then you're not going to be Chayiv in Mezuzah. And then there's going to be another case where maybe it's like a borderline, and we're going to have machlokes called chokikin lahashlim. We'll explain. So again, all this should be a review to you, but honestly, for me, I feel like I'm learning it, for the first time. It's so, I think we rushed through it. So there are 2 cases where Abaye says that's beyond doubt, that's not questioned, that it's not a Pesach, and you're not chayiv mezuzah. It's missing one of those 2 conditions, meaning it doesn't have a width of arba tfachim at the height of 3 tfachim, or it doesn't have a height of 10 tfachim. Omar Abaye, hakol modin. Okay, now we have A and inami B. So let's go through A. Im gava asar, although it does have the height of 10 tfachim, but ein begova raglea shlosha tfachim, and here you have to add berochav arba tfachim. Now, if you go up from the ground 3 tfachim, it's already moving towards the archway. You understand? It's curving up. So on the ground itself, it might be 4 tfachim, but as soon as you start going a little bit up, right, it's already getting narrow. It's like what do they think? What example can I give? It's like so narrow. It's like if you go water skiing, saying, well, what's that thing that they use to go water skiing? It's like really, really narrow. So Abaye says, how do I know? What's it called?
Not parallel. It's not parallel.
All right, if that helps you, Don, it doesn't do anything for me. I'm talking about a very narrow. I don't know if it's. Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, it's not a straight line. Is that what you mean? Right. Like a vertical 90-degree angle kind of line? Right.
It curves in. Right.
Correct. Oh, so what happens? It curves in, and now you have a very narrow passageway already. Like from the bottom and up. From the bottom, it's already narrow. How narrow is it? It's less than arba tfachim as soon as you get up to 3 tfachim. So that's the first vadai potter mimezuzah, because it's ein biraglea. It's the two, the 2 feet, so to speak, of this archway as they begin to climb up from the ground. It's ein biraglea shlosh tfachim berochav arba tfachim. So already, it's like a couple of, like a foot, before you get 1 foot up from the ground, it's already narrowed, and it's curved, as you say, and therefore it doesn't have a rochav of arba tfachim. Inami. Now we have the second case. Now we have 4 tfachim wide at the gova at the height of 3 tfachim. So we have a tchilas ha-pesach. Tchila meaning going in the basics, down on the ground, we have a pesach. But ein gavoa asar tfachim. But the top of the archway is less than 10 tfachim high. Is low klum. Everybody agrees that's not a pesach, and you're potter from mezuzah. Ki pligi, but we have a machlokus between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim, and we weren't sure exactly what the case was. Here's the case. Yesh b'raglea shlosha tfachim. You have 4 tfachim wide at the gova of 3 tfachim. Ugava asara, and the top of the archway is 10 tfachim high. Well, what's your problem? The answer is it's not rectangular. It's circular. And therefore, ein rechava arba, we need 4 tfachim from the bottom and all the way up to 10 tfachim. We don't have it. Because before it gets to 10 tfachim, it starts getting narrow. It starts moving inward. So by the time we get to the top of the 10 tfachim, maybe we have a rochav of, I don't know, maybe 1 tefach, but we certainly don't have the rochav of our ba tfachim. So why is there b'chlal a shita of Rabbi Meir that in this case he's chayav and mezuzah? And the answer is because yesh ba lachok, and he has a possibility of taking this circular top, this archway, as we said, and converting it into a rectangle by chipping away at the top of the kosel. And that's called lachuk. Lachuk means to chisel away at the wall, and now you can take this round shape and make it into a rectangular shape. Lashlima larba. What you can imagine is that if you were to draw a rectangle that is 10 tfachim high and 4 tfachim wide, at a certain point, let's call it, 8 tfachim high. At that point, it starts getting narrow for the last 2 tfachim. Just giving you an example. And it's no longer rochav arba. But what you could do is, if you imagine this circular archway inside a rectangle, then again, you could, I'm sure there are formulas here, but I don't have the formula right now mathematically, but you could figure out how much you would need in order to make this circle into the rectangle. So you build, like you draw on a piece of paper, an imaginary rectangle, where on the gova of asara tfachim, you have a width of 4 tfachim. And now you put the circular archway inside this rectangle, and as you get towards the top, it narrows. The tippy top of this archway is 10 tfachim high. And you have this, these on the right and the left of this archway on top, you have that part of the wall that has to be chiseled out to make it into a rectangle, so that the 4th tfachim width will be all the way up till the 10 tfachim height. Is Rabbi Meir Savar Chokikin Lahashlim, meaning we could imagine from the Aschala, since we had Aschala, we have a good solid base to stand on, because down on the bottom, when you go up 3 tfachim high, it's 4 tefachim wide, so we can now extend that and imagine that it went all the way up to the top and chokim lahashli, as if to say that lemala yesh begova asar tefachim rochav of arba tefachim. We judge this kippah as if we had chiseled out the wall, we had broadened the opening on the top to make it into a rectangle, and to broaden the width from one side to the other, from the right to the left, and make it into a full 4 tefachim wide. For Rabbanan Savri, ein chokikin lahashlim. And the Rabbanan deny the whole business. And they hold that we can't make these imaginary chakikos. What we see is what we get, and what we get is what we see. And right now, we don't have the measurements necessary for a Pesach, for a mezuzah, which would mean that we have 4 tefachim wide on the gova and the height of 10 tefachim. Now, as a result, it comes out that in the previous story about Rav Sheshes and the Reish Galusa, that he took the law into his own hands, and because he was unaware of this brisa, and he said, what was the story? I'll just review it very quickly. Also, Rav Sheshes, Rav Sheshes turns to his second in command, Rav Gada, and he says, "Zil shlof shadbinu." Take away these kanim from the tzuras haPesach. So there was an issue as to whether or not a tzuras haPesach, the korah on top of the tzuras haPesach, has to be sitting directly with contact onto the 2 vertical poles. And Rav Sheshes insisted that yes, and that was against Rav Nachman when the Reish Galusa, approached the members of the household. The Reish Galusa approached Rav Nachman. He paskined to them that this tzuras haPesach was reliable, even though it wasn't sitting directly on top of the 2 kanim. And when Rav Sheshes got wind of this, he instructed his second in command to just take it apart. And that's when they put him in jail and this and that. And then Rav Sheshes says, let him out of jail. But Rav Sheshes really made a mistake, because he was unaware of this discussion about chokikim lahashlim. And what you see from chokikim lahashlim is that we can view the imaginary part on top as if it was sitting on the Pesach. Amalei, so he tells one of the Amoraim, he says, if you come in contact with the household of the Reish Galusa, lo temaluhu lebei Reish Galusa v'lo midu. Meha devastis in the kippah. In other words, don't tell him about this brisa, because that's going to be very embarrassing, because I wasn't aware of the brisa. And just tell him that I changed my mind. I made a mistake in my psak. You don't need that the kana lamala, which we call the korah, has to be touching the 2 kanim on the 2 sides of the tzuras haPesach. And I changed my psak, and it's acceptable and it's reliable. So the footnote here points out that the poskim, like starting with the Rif, they paskin like Rav Nachman. And for tzuras haPesach, ein hakonim tzrichim liga b'knei b'kana ha'elyon. So the 2 kanim that are vertical don't have to have direct contact with the horizontal kana on the top. And that's because we have a brisa to support the shita of Rav Nachman. And in fact, Rav Sheshes himself backtracked, and he took back his original psak. I want to read one more note here, and then we'll start the new Mishnah. Okay, so again, Shir Pesach l'schai b'mezuzah ugova asar tefachim b'rochav arba. Aval yesh ofanim shafil she'ein bo shir zu dorim also kilu nechkak b'kir, and that's called chokikin lahashlim, based on the fact that we have the basis here, what he calls tchilas haPesach. So we need at a gova of 3 tefachim a rochav of arba, and we need a gova of asara tefachim. was just looking for one more thing, if I could find it. Just 1 second. Prices Hechsheru shel Pesach hu bechelko atachton she'eno misgalgel va'igul mafsik bein hamizuzos lemashkov ha'elyon v'afal pichen nidon hu kepesach v'chayav b'mezuzah. What's the proof over here? That in this case, that's beautiful. If you take a look at the two vertical, the vertical lines here, which what does he call them? He calls them the mezuzos, and he talks about the mashkof ha'elyon, right? So the mashkof ha'elyon, which is at the height of 10 tfachim, is not really sitting on the two parallel lines, the vertical lines, which are called mezuzos, right? Because once these vertical lines start bending in a circular motion towards the archway, then at that point, where do you have a vertical line, a mezuzah that hits the mashkov and touches the mashkov? You don't have that. So there's halacha of chokim lahashlim, as if to say that we had a gova of 10 tefachim with a rochab of arba amos of arba tefachim, but we certainly don't have a any actual contact. And the eagle, he says, the round part of the archway is mafsik bein hamezuzos lemashkov ha'elyon. And nevertheless, we're going to consider it a pesach. Okay, that leads us to the Mishnah. I'm just going to take a half a minute. I thought I had brought in something to drink, but I don't see it. Okay. All right. I've been having a couple of technical challenges, but okay, we're doing good now. We begin the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, and we're talking about a hechsher mavui, and a lot of what we're going to learn now are the basics. It's almost like, to some extent, we're going back to the first Mishnah in the Masechet. Hechsher mavui, Beit Shammai omrim lechi v'kora. Beit Shammai require two elements. Number one, a lechi, okay, and number two, a kora. Now, the height of the lechi, as we'll see, is 10 tefachim high. We don't need any thickness, any width, and a kora has to have the minimum width of a tefach. So Beit Shammai require A plus B, lechi v'kora. Ubeis Hillel omrim o lechi o kora. One of the two suffices. Rabbi Eliezer omer lechayayin. What you need is two lechis, one lechi on this side and one lechi on this side. The Gemara is going to discuss whether Rabbi Eliezer is a third shita or he's trying to reinterpret Beit Shammai, but he requires a lechi here and a lechi there. Let me point out that when it comes to a chotzer, if you remember, there was one sheet of Rebbe that required a pas and a pas. On each side, he required a pas. And this sheet of Rabbi Eliezer here in our Mishnah, which again might be an interpretation of Beit Shammai, but be that as it may, requiring a lechi on this side and a lechi on that side, is very reminiscent of the sheet of Rebbe with regard to a chotzer. But here we're not talking about a chotzer, we're talking about a mavui. A lot of what we're going to discuss is what's the difference between a mavui and a chotzer. Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Omar, Talmud Echad Lifnei Rabbi Akiva. So there were two great rabbis. There was Rabbi Yishmael and there was Rabbi Akiva. And there was some overlap of students. So one of the students came in front of Rabbi Akiva and he transmitted a halacha that he heard from Rabbi Yishmael. He was sort of like the courier. And he says, Lo nechleku Beit Shammai Beis Hillel al mavui, shu pachos mi'arba amos, shu nitar obelechi oberoch el man nechleku al rochav mi'arba amos ve'ad eser amos, shu Beit Shammai omrim lechi v'kora Beis Hillel omrim o lechi o kora. So according to this transmission, Beit Shammai agreed to Beis Hillel in a case of a very narrow mavui. What's a very narrow mavui? It's less than 4 amos wide. If it's less than 4 amos wide, then all you need is, even according to Beit Shammai, a lechi or a korah. When do Beit Shammai step up and they argue against Beis Hillel? You need both a lechi and a korah. The two together are absolutely critical. That's in the case of a mavui that has an opening that's beyond arba amos. It's greater than arba amos. Again, the maximum is 10 amos. That's because we said that if it's 10 amos wide, then it doesn't lend itself to the mavui unless you decrease the width. You might. So in this case, where the pesach of the mavui is 4 amos wide, then we have a machlokas Beit Hillel Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai requires both a lechi and a korah, or maybe 2 lechis, and Beit Hillel say o lechi o korah. But in the case of a mavui that has an opening less than 4 amos, even Beit Shammai agree that it's either a lechi or a korah, and you don't need both. Now there's a long discussion here in the Ran as to why there's so much energy being spent on Beit Shammai. We have a principle that Beit Shammai v'makom Beis Hillel eino Mishnah. We don't paskin like Beit Shammai when Beis Hillel reject Beit Shammai. And with regard to Beis Hillel, everybody agrees that it matters not what's the width of the Pesach HaMavui, whether it's less than 4 amos, more than 4 amos. All you require is either a lechi or a korah. In a sense, this whole discussion with the Talmud Echad is only theoretical, conceptual. What would Beit Shammai say about a Pesach HaMavui that's less than 4 amos? Why do we need this? And why was this codified in our Mishnah, since we never passed like Beit Shammai? So the Ran answers that the Gemara later on Daf Yud Beis is going to bring a brisa, and the brisa is going to spend a lot of time on the machlokas between Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel. What would be if the mavui is very narrow? So our Mishnah, records the testimony of a Talmud in order that when we get to that brisa, we'll be able to compare that brisa to our Mishnah about the scope of the machlokas Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. Rabbi Akiva. So now this Talmud gave a report in the name of Rabbi Yishmael to Rabbi Akiva. Al zevi al zeh nechleku. Rabbi Akiva says, no, I happen to know that Beit Shammai argue even if the mavui has a Pesach that is less than 4 amos. Even in that case, they require both a lechi and a korah. And once again, we're finding it very fascinating that Rabbi Akiva is really just analyzing the shita of Beit Shammai, and we don't paskin like Beit Shammai. That's the point that we made before. And now we start the Gemara. Now the Gemara thinks that the machlokas between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai is in the case of a mavui mefulash, where both sides, both ends of this alleyway spill into a Rishus Harab. Kiman, delo kichananya velo kitanakam. This brisa, in the case of mavui mefulash, does not shtim. It doesn't. It cannot be reconciled neither with Chananya nor with the Tanakam. So now we're going to do a quick review of what we did back on Daf Vav. You may recall we spent a lot of time on this issue. And what happens if you have a Movi Mefulash? And Beit Shammai was the one who said you need a Delas Mikan and a Delas Mikan. And Chananya said, no, all you need is a Delas Mikan and a Lechi Mikan. And the Tanakama said that all you need is a Lechi Mikan and a Lechi Mikan. I'm sorry. All you need is a Tzuras HaPesach Mikan and a Lechi Mikan. You don't need a Delas. Here, in our Mishnah, we're talking about a Mavli Mefulash in the Havamina of the Gemara. And the Mishnah says all you need is a Lechi or a Korah according to Beis Hillel, Lechi and a Korah according to Beit Shammai. No one requires not a Tzuras HaPesach, not a Deles. That's a new Shita. Rabbi Yehuda Haki Kamer. That's not our Mishnah here. Hechsher Mavi Sasu. We have a Mavi that's closed on three sides. It's only open on the fourth side. Into Rishus Harabim. Ketzad. How are you masakein such a Mavi to allow tiltul? Because again, since it opens up into Rishus Harabim, it looks very much like a Rishus Harabim. So we really want to close off the fourth side. Is Beit Shammai Omrim, in order to really be totally sure about it and obvious about it, that you're closing off the fourth side, you need both a Lechi and a Korah. And they still say no. All you need is either a Lechi or a Korah. But in the case of a Movi Mefulash, everybody agrees that you cannot be Machshir a Movi Mefulash with a Lechi or a Korah. You need a Deles, you need a Pesach, Tzuras HaPesach. You certainly need more than just a Lechi or a Korah. He writes here that in the Havamina of the Gemara, L'tanakama tzarch lasos tzuras ha'pesach mitzarecha v'lechi v'kor mitzad sheni l'chananya. You need, according to Beis Hillel, a delas mikan v'lechi kor mikan. But nobody would say that in a movi mefulash you can get away with a lechi mikan and a lechi mikan, meaning at each end of the movi just put up a lechi or a korah. Nobody accepts that shita. So we must be talking about a movi mefulash. Beit Shammai omrim lechi v'korah lememer de kasavri Beit Shammai arba mechitzos da'oraisa. Wow, as I indicated to you, we're really getting back to basics now. What we're saying is that according to Beit Shammai, we must get a mechitza on the fourth side. We have three very healthy bona fide mechitzos on three sides. Now we need a mechitza on the fourth side. And why is that? Because we have to convert this mavui into a Rishus HaYochid. If it's not a Rishus HaYochid, then it's kind of like a Rishus Harabim. I mean, rabbinically at least, it's a Rishus Harabim, and you would not be allowed to carry in the Mavu. We have to convert it into Rishus HaYochid. And now the Gemara is assuming that Beit Shammai hold that you need 4 mechitzos in order to set up Rishus HaYochid. Now let's just review. Way back when, you may remember that overpass when you had two batim on two different sides of a Rishus Harabim, and and there was an overpass, and that was Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that the area between the two batim is called a Rishus Hayochid, because there are two mechitzos. Then Rabbi Yehuda requires a lechi and another lechi on the two sides of the house. In other words, if one house faces the other, on the right side and the left side, Rabbi Yehuda puts up a lechi here and a lechi there, and he allows you to carry from one house to another house, right? Even over Rishus Harabim. And the reason for that is because Rabbi Yehuda holds shtei mechitzos d'oraisa, two mechitzos set up Rishus Hayochid. Then we have our shita, the way we've been taught, since Sheshis made Brachis, that three mechitzos make a Rishus Hayochid d'oraisa. Now we have a third shita in the Havamina of the Gemara of Beit Shammai, that you need four mechitzos to create a Rishus Hayochid d'oraisa. Now, in a funny kind of sense, this might be a kula. Well, we think of it as a chumrah because we want to allow you to carry there. We need a fourth mechitza according to this understanding of Beit Shammai. But there's also a kula because what it means is, in the absence of the fourth mechitza, if I were to carry something from Rishus Harabim into this mavui that only has three mechitzos, then I'd be potter according to this understanding of Beit Shammai, because I didn't take it into Rishus Hayochid. It's not closed off, hermetically sealed on the fourth side. But the Gemara seems to be very, very hesitant, almost as a natural recoil from the possibility that we really need four mechitzos. And not only that, I would like to study the possibility that you can create a fourth mechitza for a lechi, with a lechi and a korah. I'm just not exactly understanding how that works. I mean, does the lechi create a mechitza going this way, or does the korah create a mechitza going down? With peep, so same. He writes here the name of Rabbeinu Peretz in the footnote. Eina kavona shetzarich arba mechitzas mamish, that the Torah only recognizes a Rishus Hayochid if there are four mechitzos mamish. She'im kain lo moel bazel lechi v'korah. Like we said before, lechi and a korah would not be enough to really create a fourth mechitza d'oraisa. Ela kavona hi shetzarich shem arba mechitzos. You need some sort of halachic category called a fourth mechitza. Dainu sholosh mechitzos gemuros, three full-fledged mechitzos, and then you need another mechitza, which is a quasi mechitza. He calls it a mechitza kol shehu. And even to get a mechitza kol shehu, you would require, according to Beit Shammai, a lechi and a korah. And why do we need both? Because again, if we hold that midoraisa, this mavui, because it has three mechitzos gemuros, is a Rishus Hayochid, so then all I need is a heker. I have to make sure that people realize that this mavui is Rishus Hayochid. They shouldn't confuse it with Rishus Harabim, because again, it looks like Rishus Harabim in the fact that the rabbim, enter in there and they spill into the mavui. So we have to get a heker. So the heker is either a lechi or it's a korah. But now we're saying no, that according to Beit Shammai, it's not enough just to set up a heker. We need a fourth mechitza. Again, it's not going to be a real mechitza. We have three real mechitzos, which we call mechitzos gemuros. Now we have a mechitza she'ena gemura, which is called a mechitza kolshu. And how do you create a mechitza kolshu? By combining a korah with a lechi. The korah sort of closes off this mechitza on top, and it represents the height of the mechitza. The lechi represents the width of the mechitza, and we combine the two, we end up with producing a mechitza kolshu. Lo, says the Gemara, no, that's not what's going on here in Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai would be modeh that lizrok mishalosh hu de mechayef. let's say Lizrok, he picks up an object in a Rishus HaRabim, and he throws it into this mavu that has only 3 mechitzos. He would be chayav. Beit Shammai agree that 3 mechitzos are enough to generate a Rishus HaYochid de'orais. So again, not like I said before, that you need 4 mechitzos lekula, and if you only have 3, if you carry something from Rishus HaRabim into the 3 mechitzos, you're potter. No. Beit Shammai would agree that 3 mechitzos you're chayav, it's a Rishus HaYochid de'orais. However, litaltel, now you want to be makil, and you want to say that 3 mechitzos are enough to create a Rishus HaYochid, which is true midoraisa. But let me go ahead and allow you to carry in that area, as if it were a full-fledged Rishus HaYochid, like inside my house. Ad ikar ba. Now I need 4 mechitzos. So I need a 4th mechitzah midrabanan. That's the unique shita of Beis Shammai, in order to be matir tilted. Because the Rabbanan are going to say that even though it has 3 mechitzos, which on a doraisa level make it into Rishus HaYochid, we're not going to allow you to carry there unless you put up a 4th mechitzah. That 4th mechitzah does not have to be a mechitzah gemura, as we saw Rabbeinu Peretz. It's got to be a mechitzah kolshu. And how do you create that kolshu? By setting up a korah and a lech. Now we get to Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai omrim o belechi o bekora. Lema, shall we say, because savri Beit Hillel sholosh mechitzos da'oraisa. In other words, now we're coming lafuke Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, we said according to Rabbi Yehuda, all you need is 2 mechitzos to create a Rishus HaYochid da'oraisa. Now we're assuming that you need 3 mechitzos according to Beis Hillel, midoraisa, because again, if 2 mechitzos were enough, then you would not require a 3rd mechitza by setting up a lechi. I'm sorry, that if you had 3 mechitzos in this mavui, then you would not require a lechi and a korah on the 4th side. Let me see if I understand the logic of the Gemara. If I can convince you that I'm right. If Beis Hillel hold that 2 mechitzos are enough to oraisa, then all you need on a drabanan level is to add a 3rd mechitza. Once you add that 3rd mechitza, for example, if you have a classic mavui that sasu, right, that has 3 mechitzos, then that should be enough, because I added another mechitza on top of what the Torah required. So do we say, therefore, that according to Beis Hillel, we should derive the conclusion that you need shalosh mechitzas d'oraisa? And again, let me read to you he has the Rashba. He says, Sharei ilu hayu sovrim, if Beis Hillel would hold shedai b'shtei mechitzos, which, as we said before, the Shita Rabbi Yehuda, that all you need is 2 mechitzos to set up Rishus HaYochid d'oraisa, is lo avi matzachinon lasos lemavui shalosh mechitzos gemuros eladai beruach shlishis b'lechi b'korah. You follow? If we have a requirement midorais of 3 mechitzos, then on the 4th mechitza, the 4th side, you need a lechi or a korah, and that sets up a quasi 4th mechitza. But if you hold that all you need midorais is 2 mechitzos, then that should be enough to allow you on the 3rd side to set up a lechi or a korah. Why do Beis Hillel only allow a lechi or a korah when there are 3 complete mechitzos? If midoraisa, all you need to set up Rishus HaYochid is 2 mechitzos. Okay, that's the Rashba's understanding of this Gemara. So he's going to prove that according to Beis Hillel, you need 3 mechitzos d'oraisa, and that's why the lechi and korah is only effective on the 4th side. Now the Gemara says, lo. you have no proof. It could be that when we talk about lechumra, which means a man is standing in Rishus Harab and he throws an object into this area that is enclosed by two mechitzas on two sides, is lizrok mishtayim hu demechayev. All you need is two mechitzas d'oraisa, and you're going to be chayev. And this would certainly be the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, and maybe they still accept that shita. But letaltel, now we're talking about a drabanan adeika shalosh plus lechi v'torah. So Gemara says that even if you hold two mechitzas are enough, midrabanan, it really looks like a rishus harabah, like that case I gave you before. We have two houses on two sides of a public thoroughfare. It really looks like between the two houses is a rishus harabah. So the first and foremost requirement on a drabanan level is to set up a third mechitza. Okay, now you have a third mechitza. So you're on the way. You know, it's already being closed off. It's looking more and more like a private area. But on top to boot, the Rabbanan require a lechi v'korah. So it's not the way that you understood it in your question, that if two mechitzas d'oraisa are enough, all I would need on the third side is a lechi or a korah. No. There's a great gap here between the d'oraisa halacha and the drabanan halacha. The d'oraisa halacha requires two mechitzos, and if somebody would throw something from Rosh Hashanah between these two mechitzos, it'd be chayav. But the rabbanan have a double requirement. Their goal is, in some sense, to end up with four mechitzos. That's what they require. So they're going to break it down into two elements. One element is going to be a third mechitza, which is a mechitza gemura, an absolute mechitza, and then they're going to suffice on the fourth side with a lechi or a korah. He says in the name of the Ritva, Shekain ein avokum nira la noshim kirshus hayochid im ein heker beruach revis. Notice when you're dealing with the mentality of the rank and file citizen, his concept, his vision of Rishus HaYochid, he doesn't know theoretical concepts in halacha. He thinks of Rishus HaYochid is an area that's completely enclosed. And we can satisfy that need by setting up a mavui of three mechitzos and setting up a lechi and a korah on the fourth side. Now he has here a kasha from the Tosa Rosh. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but let's just see if we can get anything out of it. He said, Ketzad, what was the Gemara thinking in the Havamina? Nitan lo chiach midivrei beit sile, sheshalosh mechitzas doraisa, rei tochin lomar, shetam ador shenachtu divreim, legabe mavui sheyesh lo shalosh mechitzas gemurus kedei lashmienu, sha'af ba'ofen kazeh, tzarech lechi, o korb dofen revius. Wow. The Tosa Rosh says, I don't understand the premise of the Gemara. If one would argue that according to Beis Hillel, on a Doraisa level, all you need is two mechitzos to set up Rishus HaYochid, that it could be that a mavui, you could be mater mavui with a lechi or a korah on the third side, and one side could be totally open. Why does the Mishnah and Beis Hillel speak about a mavui that has three mechitzos gemuros and add a lechi or a korah? It wants to teach us that even in a case where it has three mechitzos gemuros, we still need a lechi and a korah. But in the absence of a third mechitza gemura, for sure you would need a lechi and a korah, and that would suffice. The Od, and he says furthermore, shehutzachu lahotzi midas beit Shammai asovrim shtzarich lechi v'korah b'revius. Maybe again, the reason why Beis Hillel require a lechi or a korah in the revius, even though that should be sufficient in the shlishis, is lafuke to exclude Beit Shammai and require both a lechi and a korah in the ruach revius. Ach liolam, it's possible shem sovrim shedai b'shtei mechitzas gemuris min haTorah. So now the Tosa Rosh is stuck with trying to understand why the Gemara initially thinks that, according to Beis Hillel, it must be that that two mechitzos would not be enough on a Doraisa level. Al Kain Pirish Bofen Acher, Chekavonis Agmor, Lemo Kasavri Beit Shama, Beis Hillel, Sholosh Mechitzos Doraisa Kachi. Shemi Acher V'Sovrim Beis Hillel, Shedai Belechi Obekorv Mechitzos Revius, Yesh Lo Chiach Mikach, Shein Tzorch Arba Mechitzos Min HaTorah, Eladai B'Sholosh. The Tosa Rosh is learning a whole different shot in the Gemara. One second. No, maybe it's not so far from our shot. We said the Gemara in the Havamina thought that you require Shalosh Mechitzos Doraisa. What's he saying now? Ela Piresh, where I lost the place for a second. Oh, here it is. Ela Piresh be ofenach. Shekavonas HaGemara Kachi Shemi Achar V'Sovrim Beis Hillel Shedai Belechi Al Kor Mechitzos Revius Yesh Lo Chiach Mikach Ein Tzorech Arba Mechitzos Min HaTorah. She'ein tzorech arba mechitzos min haTorah. So again, we thought that the Gemara was trying to prove that you need 3 mechitzos, right? That Beis Hillel holds you need a 3rd mechitza. So now he's learning different. He's saying the Gemara wanted to prove that you don't need a 4th mechitza. As far as whether you need a 3rd mechitza is concerned, that we don't know. We can't know that one way or the other. But one thing we can deduce is that you don't need 4 mechitzos midoraisa, because you need 4 mechitzos doraisa. Then it would be impossible that the lechi and korah would help in the case of a mavui to substitute for the 4th mechitza to set up a rishus hayochid. So again, just to summarize. There's the Rashba's understanding of this Gemara. That's the way we interpret it, and the Rosh's understanding of the Gemara. The Rashba understood the Gemara wanted to prove that according to Beis Hillel, you need a 3rd mechitza doraisa, because otherwise Beis Hillel would have allowed for a lechi korah on the 3rd side instead of requiring it on the 4th side. And now we have the Rosh's interpretation that the Gemara is just trying to prove that Beis Hillel does not require 4 mechitzos midoraisa. Obviously, because lechi and korah are sufficient. However, if you want to know what would Beis Hillel say about 2 mechitzos, that we don't know. That becomes, that's in the dark. We have no answer to that question. And then the Gemara answers, lo, mishtayim hu demachayim. The Rosh can interpret those words. According to the Rashba, it makes a lot more sense that the Gemara is trying to say, no. I had no proof that you require a 3rd mechitza. It could be that 2 mechitzos would be good enough. How is the Rosh interpreting these words? Because again, we're trying to prove, according to the Rosh, that he doesn't have a requirement of 4 mechitzos deoraisa. So why did Gemara come back and say mishtayim hu demachayim? I guess the Rosh is going to learn it's even possible mishtayim, right? Which the Gemara, it's a little odd because according to the Rosh, the Gemara even in the Havamina recognized the possibility that Beis Hillel might require no more than 2 mechitzos doraisa. So I don't know, the language of the Gemara is a little bit problematic here, according to the Rosh. What does it mean? Lo, mishtayim hu demachayim. And the Gemara shouldn't have been putting the emphasis on mishtayim hu demachayim. According to the Rosh, we wanted to prove that you don't need 3 mechitzos. I'm sorry, that you don't need 4 mechitzos. So the Gemara should have said, no, maybe you would need 4 mechitzos, but it's enough that you have 3 mechitzos plus a lechi, or 3. All right, let's just go on now in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer omer l'chayayim. Rabbi Eliezer requires 2 lechis. How do we understand Rabbi Eliezer? L'chayayim v'kora ka'omar, o dilma l'chayayim below kora ka'omar. In other words, does Rabbi Eliezer require an additional lechi? For example, Beit Shammai hold you need both a korah and a lechi, and Rabbi Eliezer says it's not enough to have a korah and a lechi. You need a korah and two lechayayim. O Dilma, well, perhaps Rabbi Eliezer is saying that lechayayim below korah ka'omar. That according to Beit Shammai, when they require both a lechi and a korah, it's not an absolute. You've got two alternatives. You can either have both a lechi and a korah, or instead of a korah, you can have a second lechi. According to the first side, Rabbi Eliezer has an absolute requirement of two lechayayim. Probably it means that according to Beit Shammai, you need a korah and a lechi. And Rabbi Eliezer is telling us that what does Beit Shammai have in mind when he said you need a korah and a lechi? It means two lechis. So you need a korah plus two lechis. Oh, Dilma. Or perhaps Rabbi Eliezer was analyzing Beit Shammai in the following way, that you have a lechi or a korah. I'm sorry, a lechi and or a korah or a second lechi. Those are your two possibilities. Toshma, we're going to derive from a brisa Maisa by Rabbi Eliezer. Sheholach Eitzel Rabbi Yossi ben Preda Talmido. So Rabbi Eliezer is visiting his student, Rabbi Yossi. And here we turn to Daf Yud Beis of an Al. And where did they meet? In a place called Ovolin. All right, that's the name of the town. Umitzao, and he finds Rabbi Yossi, his Talmud, Yoshev b'mavui de'enlo ela lechi echad. There was only one lechi. Amalo, so Rabbi Eliezer turns to his Talmud and he says, B'ni, my son, my beloved Talmud, I say lechi achim. You need a second lechi. Amalo. So Rabbi Yossi turns to his Rebbe and he says, as a question, he says, V'chilu sosmo ani tzarech? Why are you requiring me to put up a second lechi? Do I have to absolutely close off my mavui? In other words, if I would put a lechi on each side of the Pesach, then it's going to diminish the width of the entrance of the opening into the mavui, and it's going to make it like it's sasu. Amalo, so Rabbi Eliezer responded, Yisase, umavaka. What's your problem? Let it look sasu. The din is that you have to be sosem and close it off. That's what you have to do. Then the Brisa continues. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, lo nechluku beit Shammai beisil al mavui, shehu pachos. Shehu pachos mi arba amashenu tzar klum. Wow, we're gonna have to come back to that tomorrow. She'eno tzar klum. Doesn't need any tikkun at all if it's less than 4 amos wide. Al ma nechleku al rochav me'arba amos v'yad esich beit Shammai omrim tzarech letakno al yidei lechi v'korah. Beit Shil omrim o lechi o korah. Oh, so now let's see what we're getting out of this brisa. Funny mias, what do we see from this brisa? That Rabbi Yossi turns to his Rebbe and he says, do I have to close it off? If you're going to tell me that l'chayayim v'korah, that Rabbi Eliezer was adding a second lechi on top of the lechi and korah, is mishom haki omar. Now we justify the language v'chilas sosmo anitzarach. Now it's really sosum. It's sosum on top, sosum on one side, sosum on the other side. It's completely closed off. Now, below korah, If he's adding a second lechian as a requirement on the other side, Milas Sosma, why is that called closing it all off? Well, what did Rabbi Yossi mean when he turned to his Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer, and he said, are you requiring me that I do a stima? This is not total stima. Achi comes. Someone says, no. V'chila Sosma b'lachayayim ani tzarech. He understood that if you require a second lechi, even if you don't have a korah on top, that itself is called lisosmo. And that will Mirz Hashem. That's going to be the kickoff of tomorrow's. Okay, then so we'll stop. We'll stop here on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, and we'll start with Omar Mar officially, but we'll review it. We'll review it tomorrow. Okay, then. Let me wish you a good day, and Mirz Hashem. Tomorrow we'll pick this up, and that'll be it. Okay, just want to make a note. Where's Omar Mar so I don't lose the place. Omar Mar. Oh, here we go. That's